Joseph was a struggling man in his late 20s, burdened by the weight of poverty. Despite his sharp mind and strong work ethic, life had dealt him a cruel hand. He lived in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city, barely scraping by as a delivery driver for a local grocery store. Each day felt like a relentless cycle of survival. One afternoon, while making a delivery to an exclusive neighborhood, Joseph's life took an unexpected turn. The mansion he arrived at was breathtaking, tall iron gates, sprawling gardens, and a fountain that seemed to sing luxury. He could never have imagined setting foot on such grounds. The owner, Sylvia Hartman, was waiting by the entrance. She was a striking woman in her early 40s, dressed in designer clothes and exuding an air of confidence. Sylvia was known across the city, not just for her immense wealth but for her eccentricity. Rumors surrounded her, most notably about her debilitating body odor, which no amount of money or treatment could seem to cure. As Joseph handed over her groceries, their eyes met briefly. Sylvia smiled. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, her voice low and melodic. "No, ma'am," Joseph replied, suddenly self-conscious of his scuffed shoes and worn uniform. "You have an honest face," she said, tilting her head as if appraising him. "I like that." From that day on, Sylvia insisted that Joseph personally deliver her groceries every week. Their brief encounters turned into longer conversations. She would invite him in, offering him tea and asking him about his life. At first, Joseph was hesitant. Her odor was overpowering, almost suffocating, but the way she listened to him, the way her eyes softened with empathy, was something he hadn't experienced in years. As weeks turned into months, Sylvia made an unusual proposition. "I know this will sound unorthodox," she began one afternoon, her hands trembling slightly as she held her teacup. "But I've grown fond of you, Joseph. I've seen your struggles, your determination. And I believe you deserve more than this life has given you." Joseph frowned, unsure where this was heading. "I've never been lucky in love," Sylvia continued. "People have always seen my money first and me second. But you, Joseph, you've shown me kindness without asking for anything in return. I want to offer you a better life. Marry me, and I'll ensure you'll never have to worry about money again." Joseph froze. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marry her. The idea seemed absurd. He wasn't in love with her, how could he be? And yet, the promise of a life free from poverty, of helping his sick mother and paying off his brother's debts, was tempting. Sylvia didn't seem to expect love, she only wanted companionship. But then there was the smell, an inescapable, cloying presence that filled every corner of her grand mansion. Joseph didn't respond immediately. Sylvia's offer hung heavy in the room, and he could feel her watching him intently, her hands nervously fidgeting with her diamond bracelet. He glanced around the opulent living room, crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and priceless art lining the walls. A life so far removed from his own that it almost felt unreal. I don't know what to say," Joseph stammered, his thoughts racing. "Say you'll think about it," Sylvia said softly. "This isn't a decision to be made lightly. I want to help you, Joseph. And in return, I'd like someone by my side. Someone I can trust." Joseph nodded, muttering, "I'll think about it." But even as he left the mansion that day, the temptation gnawed at him. For the next week, he could hardly sleep. Images of his mother struggling to afford her medication and his younger brother on the verge of eviction filled his mind. The weight of his family's burdens crushed him daily, and Sylvia's proposal felt like a lifeline. When Joseph returned to the mansion the following week, Sylvia greeted him at the door, her expression unreadable. Before he could hand over the groceries, he blurted out, "I'll do it." Her face lit up with a smile. "You won't regret this, Joseph." The wedding was a quiet affair. Sylvia insisted on keeping it private, away from the tabloids. Joseph stood in the grand hall of her estate, wearing a tailored suit he'd never have dreamed of affording, while Sylvia, draped in a simple but elegant white gown, looked radiant. Yet, as they exchanged vows, Joseph couldn't ignore the sharp, pungent smell that clung to the air, even masked by the heavy scent of roses. The marriage brought Joseph everything he had hoped for, and more. Sylvia kept her word. His mother received the best medical care money could buy, his brother's debts were cleared, and Joseph himself was dressed in luxury, chauffeured in sleek cars, and introduced to a world of wealth he had only ever seen in magazines. But with every benefit came the cost. Living with Sylvia's body odor was a constant battle. It didn't matter how spacious the mansion was or how many perfumes filled the air, the smell lingered. He began to avoid physical closeness, inventing excuses to sleep in separate rooms. One evening, as they sat across from each other in the dining hall, she asked bluntly, "You don't love me, do you?" Joseph froze, his fork suspended midair. "What? Of course. Don't lie to me," Sylvia interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "I've been around long enough to know when someone's heart isn't in it. You married me for the life I could give you. And I married you because, well, I thought I could live with that." Joseph looked down at his plate, guilt gnawing at him. "Sylvia, I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. But love, it's complicated." She laughed bitterly, setting down her glass of wine. "Complicated? Yes, that's one way to put it." For weeks after that conversation, tension hung between them. Sylvia withdrew, spending most of her time in her study, while Joseph wandered the mansion like a stranger. The money, the luxury, it all began to feel hollow. He wondered if he had made a mistake, if he had traded his integrity for a gilded cage. One night, Sylvia invited Joseph to her study. When he entered, she was sitting behind her desk, a pile of papers spread out before her. "I've been doing some thinking," she said, motioning for him to sit. "I've spent years trying every treatment, every remedy for this condition. Nothing has worked. But I recently found a specialist overseas, a doctor who believes he might have a solution. It's experimental and risky, but I'm willing to try it. For us." Joseph didn't know what to say. "You don't have to do that for me, Sylvia. I'm not doing it just for you," she replied. "I'm doing it for myself, too. I'm tired of being judged, of being avoided. If this works, maybe we can finally start over." Her words stirred something in Joseph, an unfamiliar feeling he couldn't quite place. The next morning, Sylvia left for the treatment. Joseph stayed behind in the mansion, unsure of what the future held. Days turned into weeks, and with every passing moment, he questioned his choices more deeply. Had he been too quick to take the easy way out? Could he ever truly care for a woman whose wealth had bought him but whose heart he had yet to understand? Joseph tried to adjust to life in the mansion without Sylvia. The silence was deafening, and though the luxury surrounded him, it did little to ease the growing unease in his heart. Her absence gave him too much time to think. For the first time, Joseph began to truly notice the emptiness of his new life. The sparkling chandeliers, the endless marble hallways, and the lush gardens all felt cold without Sylvia's presence. He couldn't explain it, but he found himself missing her voice, her company, and even the way she always smiled at him despite his guarded indifference. One evening, while wandering aimlessly, he entered Sylvia's study. The faint scent of her favorite lavender candles lingered, and her desk was still cluttered with papers she had been working on. Curious, Joseph began sifting through them. Most were business contracts and charity proposals, but one folder caught his eye. Inside, he found a handwritten letter addressed to him. "Dear Joseph, I don't know if this treatment will work, and I won't pretend that I'm not afraid. But if it doesn't, I need you to know something. I've never regretted marrying you. Even if it wasn't for love, you've brought a warmth into my life that I hadn't felt in years. I know I'm not an easy person to be with. My flaws, my condition, have pushed people away all my life. But you stayed, and for that, I will always be grateful. Whatever happens, I hope you'll find happiness, whether it's with me or someone else. You deserve that. Joseph sat back in the chair, the letter trembling in his hands. Her words struck something deep within him, a pang of guilt and something else, something he wasn't ready to name. A week later, Joseph received a call from Sylvia's assistant. "She's coming home tomorrow," the woman said. "The treatment is complete, but she hasn't spoken much about the results." Joseph's heart raced as he prepared for her return. He couldn't decide if it was excitement, dread, or a confusing mix of both. When Sylvia finally arrived, she looked different. She seemed thinner, her face more drawn, but there was a glimmer in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Joseph hesitated by the door as she stepped inside, the scent of roses from her perfume filling the air. For the first time, there was no trace of the overwhelming odor that had defined her presence. "It worked," she said softly, as if afraid to believe it herself. Joseph didn't know what to say. He wanted to congratulate her, to express relief, but the words didn't come. Instead, he noticed how she looked at him, hopeful, vulnerable, waiting for him to say something that might bridge the chasm between them. "I'm glad," he said finally, his voice faltering. Sylvia smiled faintly, but there was something guarded in her expression. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to, Joseph. I wouldn't blame you." Her words surprised him. "Why would you say that?" "Because I know this marriage hasn't been easy for either of us," she replied, stepping closer. "But now that the problem is gone, maybe you can be honest with yourself about what you really want." Joseph didn't respond immediately. He knew what she was asking. Could he truly see a future with her now that her flaw, the one thing he had fixated on, was gone? Or had this always been about more than just her condition? To be seen and loved for who I am, not what I have. "I know this hasn't been easy for either of us, Joseph, but I never stopped hoping that one day, we'd find our way to something real." Joseph reached for her hand, hesitating for a moment before clasping it gently. "I can't promise I get everything right, Sylvia. But I promise to try. Not because of the money, or what you've done for my family, but because I want to know the woman who's been by my side all this time." The vulnerability in his voice was unmistakable, and Sylvia's smile deepened, this time radiating genuine joy. Over the weeks that followed, their relationship began to transform. Joseph made an effort to learn more about Sylvia, not just her habits or quirks, but her dreams, fears, and the pain she had carried for years. Sylvia, in turn, softened her guard and allowed him to see the parts of herself she had kept hidden, even from the world that revered her wealth. One evening, while they shared a quiet dinner, Sylvia reached across the table and said, "I've spent so long thinking that love would never be in the cards for me. But now, I think, maybe I was wrong." Joseph smiled, his hand meeting hers. "Maybe we both were." From that night onward, something shifted between them. Joseph began to notice things about Sylvia he'd once overlooked, the way she lit up when she spoke about her charity work, her sharp sense of humor that had always been hidden beneath her guarded demeanor, and the warmth in her eyes whenever she looked at him. The smell that had once been a barrier between them was gone, but Joseph realized it had never been the real problem. His own fear, pride, and inability to see beyond his circumstances had been the true obstacle. And now, with those walls broken down, he found himself genuinely drawn to Sylvia in a way he hadn't expected. Months turned into a year, and their bond deepened. Joseph became more than just Sylvia's husband, he became her partner in every sense of the word. He started helping with her business ventures, offering fresh ideas and insights she valued. Together, they worked to expand her charitable projects, providing opportunities to others who, like Joseph, had once been trapped by poverty. One sunny afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through the garden, Sylvia stopped and turned to him. "Do you ever regret saying yes to me?" Joseph smiled, pulling her closer. "Not for a second. That yes changed my life. It brought me to you." Sylvia laughed softly, resting her head against his shoulder. "You've given me something money never could, Joseph. A reason to believe in love again." They stood there, surrounded by blooming flowers and the soft hum of nature, neither of them needing to say anything more. What had started as a marriage of convenience had transformed into a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and something neither of them had anticipated: true love. In the end, it wasn't the wealth or the absence of Sylvia's condition that defined their happiness. It was the choice they made every day to see and value each other for who they truly were. And for the first time, they both felt free.
I don't wanna tie you up now.